Welcome to the CaRE2 Cancer Research Link. Today for our segment, we are going to be talking to one of our clinician-scientists, very rare breed, Dr. Jose Trevino. It is such a pleasure to have you here. So could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. My name is Jose Trevino. I'm a surgeon in the Department of Surgery at the University of Florida. My basic specialization is in surgical oncology, and I really subspecialize in diseases of the pancreas, the bile duct, and the liver. My formal training, as I mentioned, is in oncology, but as an oncologist, I also take time and effort to do a lot of research for pancreatic cancer.
Okay, so what is your role in the CaRE2 Health Equity Center?
Right. So my role in the Health Equity Center is primarily to look at the disparities in pancreatic cancer. As we know, there are a lot of disparities in cancers such as breast cancer, lung cancer, and prostate cancer. But as time's progressing, since we've done fairly well in the research, patients that have had these types of cancers, our clinical outcomes have gotten a lot better. Mm-hmm. The areas where I believe we really need help with in research to develop better therapies one of them is in pancreatic cancer. The research that we've done in our lab and through the Health Equity Center is to look at, is there really a disparity in pancreatic cancer, number one, and then number two, how is this affecting our patient population? Are there differences?
Okay, great. So we cannot have a clinician on the CaRE2 Cancer Research Link without making a reference for you to give us a good understanding of pancreatic cancer. Right. So can you tell our audience just very briefly, absolutely, what is it, what causes it, and how, right, how should people be recognize the symptoms, and right, if they can prevent it, just...
Absolutely. So pancreatic cancer has been a devastating disease, I think, since we started recognizing it many, many years ago, generations ago. It's primarily a cancer that develops within the pancreas, and the pancreas itself provides a human body two main functions. Mm. It provides sugar control, which through the effects of insulin, and it allows your body to control how the sugar runs through your body, and also helps with digestion of foods. And that's kind of a simplistic way of looking at what the pancreas does. Unfortunately, when people develop diseases of the pancreas, and primarily in this case pancreatic cancer, it is a very aggressive disease. In other words, when it starts to grow, it's in a part of the body where it's somewhat isolated, and by the time that most people get detected with this, it's already spread. And it's been also aggressive on many fronts because the therapies that are out today aren't very good. And this is why there's this incredible importance in the Health Equity Center and areas of research in pancreas to determine if it's aggressive we know it's aggressive in everyone. Are there potential differences in certain individuals that might be able to help us determine particular targets that will allow us to treat everyone? And that's the key thing. So in brief, it's a devastating disease. Mm-hmm. The pancreas has a great function in our body. But the development of a cancer in this can lead to bad outcomes. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I've learned through your talks is the idea that, just as you mentioned, we know about prostate cancer disparities, we know about breast cancer, colorectal, but there's this sneaking way of pancreatic cancer rising up. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a great point. We don't know if the incidence is rising. In other words, is it rising because patients are developing more pancreatic cancer? Are patients living longer to develop pancreatic cancer? Mm-hmm. Or has this just been a really bad disease for so long, and now it's getting to a point where people are identifying it at an earlier stage, mm-hmm, or actually saying, hey, listen, this person just didn't die of cancer like we used to many years ago. They died, mm-hmm, of cancer. No, we're saying, mm-hmm, that this person died of pancreatic cancer. But what we've noticed, and when you go back and looking at now, the incidence of pancreatic cancer is increasing significantly. And right now, at this present time, the number one killer in the country is lung cancer. The number two killer is breast and prostate, mm-hmm, and currently the number 3 and number 4 killer are colorectal cancer and pancreatic cancer. Mm. But what's happening is by the year 2020, which is not far away, it will be the number 2 killer in this country. And by 2030, it's going to encroach up to lung cancer, and therefore there's a lot of attention nowadays as to how we address it. There are a ton of researchers out there and oncologists looking at different combinations of chemotherapies to try to affect this particular type of cancer, pancreatic cancer. The problem is that there's only so much toxin that we could put in an individual and hope to make a difference. And so the research that we're doing is initially looking at, well, are there certain targets within the tumor that will allow us to, that we can develop that will allow us to get better outcomes, clinical outcomes. The problem is that, you know, and I say this a lot when I give my talks, and I say this a lot when I talk to my residents and fellows that work with me in this research effort, is that we can't look at everybody the same. And that's been a big mistake that we've done for a long time. For a long time, we took all pancreatic cancer patients and we assumed that they were all the same, we should treat them all the same. And I would beg to differ, that I would say that not only do we have differences amongst individuals, we have differences amongst races, we have differences amongst ethnic backgrounds, we have differences amongst populations in certain areas of the country, let alone the world. And so this is an important detail that there are very few investigations on, and it's something that we're very passionate about. Because my cancer will, God forbid, will never be your cancer, God forbid.
Absolutely.
And therefore, for me to be able to identify the differences in you and the differences in me might allow us to identify better strategies, better treatments, and have better outcomes. People talk a lot about this personalized medicine and talk about how the future will eventually be personalized. And I think that is an incredible idea, because the hope is that in the future that we're going to be able to take someone's tumor and identify so many differences about it and be able to say, this person has these differences and therefore they should be treated with this particular therapy, and then they get to live longer and live healthier lives.
Seems like we are racing against time. I mean, you're telling us that pancreatic cancer is on the increase, it's crawling up, and then it's a very complex disease. I mean, it is, you know, you have to look at subgroups, you have to look at different populations, and for us at CaRE2 Health Equity Center, we focus on the diversity within the Latino community as well as within the Black community. So it's very important and very timely that you are focused on this. So could you describe to our viewers what exactly are you doing to be able to address this cancer in these communities? So
with the Health Equity Center and then the CaRE2 health equity component of that, and what we've done is really done something that has taken a lot of interest in a lot of people. With the help of the National Institute of Health, the NIH, we've been able to fund this great program in which it has allowed us to really start looking at these tumors in a much different way. So we have a population of African Americans, we have a population of Afro-Caribbeans, we have a population of Cubans, of Mexicans, of all these different subsets of Hispanic, Latinos, and Blacks. And what we've done is been able to isolate out that tumor. So just to give you a little bit of background of the surgery that I do surgery primarily for pancreatic cancer. And so when I take the tumor out of a patient, of a Latino or a Black, I'm able to with their permission, through the governing body here at the University of Florida, allow us to be able to work with our patients on this, able to get a piece of the tumor that is alive, and then be able to use that tumor to identify certain markers. And so we're able to take this tumor, grow this tumor, look at the differences amongst that tumor of that patient, and be able to study it. And so our program, our research program under CaRE2 and the Health Equity Center here at the University of Florida, what we're able to do is able to investigate that particular tumor of that particular patient and be able to determine if we can develop therapies for it, as I mentioned. With our partners at the University of Southern California and the Florida A&M University in Tallahassee, what we've been able to do is partner up this incredible partnership with experts from 3 different great organizations and say, is there a way we can defeat this cancer? And so with our ability to get these tumors and grow these tumors from these particular patient populations, Blacks and Latinos, we're able to send these tumors to the Florida A&M as well as the University of Southern California, and with their expertise, they're able to identify particular targets and use molecules to be able to attack these tumors.
Wow.
So it's a beautiful organization that we have, and this is how this is going to be done. I mean, we are 2 different people, and we're here sitting and talking about passionate things that we care about. which is health equities and how we're going to defeat them.
Cancer.
And with the investigators we have at the University of Southern California that have this incredible model to look at cancer in a particular way that replicates with what it is in the human being. And then we have these incredible investigators at the Florida A&M University where they are able to have these molecules that will attack the tumor on multiple different levels. I said, that's what we need to be. And on a brief comment, the people have talked about this, and I think the community and the world need to know this, is that a lot of research has been done under this, what we call a silo component. And just for clarification, a silo is one kind of unit that kind of sits up, and I'm not from the country, but when people talked about it, I had to look it up. But it's this silo mechanism where it's just one structure that stands alone, right? And the idea that we need to break that idea is so important. And this is what CaRE2 does. This is what our Health Equity Center does. It breaks down that silo and says that you need to work with these great people at these different centers, and then from there, you're going to get great minds together, and you're going to develop these.
That is so well said and so beautifully said. And thanks to the NIH National Cancer Institute, because it's actually their vision that we are implementing on telling us that we have to break down the silos and we have to work with each other. But this is such a fascinating, highly fascinating research that you're doing. So could you tell us a little bit more about what are some of the preliminary results that are coming out, and how does this impact those at-risk populations that we are discussing?
That's a great point. I think that our research component, as I mentioned, is structured amongst 3 experts in the field that are doing wonderful work. The beauty of what UF does is we're able to get these tumors and maintain them alive, or viable is the way we use the word. And when we do is one of the components of our research project, our program was to look at what are the differences amongst that tumor, amongst patients of Latino descent, or Latinos and Blacks, African Americans, Afro-Caribbean, even African to some degree. And be able to really determine what are the changes within the cell that make them specific. We call them genomics, so we look at the whole exome sequencing is the kind of the fancy term that we use to really look at what are the differences in the genes of each person in that tumor. And as I mentioned earlier, this is what's going to give us the idea that our populations might be different, and if our populations are different, we'll be able to determine good targets for them. I think that's important. Something that people have started to look into, but I think that we need more of. And so that was one particular area, and we're looking at that now with our help, as I mentioned, with our group at the University of Southern California, with the beautiful exome, or looking at the genetic sequencing components, and they're doing a great job with that. The other parts of our group are primarily looking at what are the important components of the tumor. So there's cancer cells in the tumor, and there's also what we consider a supporting microenvironment. And that's a fancy term to say that there are cells around the cancer that either help or hinder its growth. And in the case of pancreatic cancer, there unfortunately are more cells that are being, I sometimes use the word bamboozled, or there's cells that are being manipulated to help the cancer grow. And so what we've done is able to isolate out the cells here at the University of Florida, the cells that are the cancer components, the cells that are trying to unfortunately kill people, and then we're also isolating out the cells that are being hijacked, let's say. And what we've done with our help with our groups at the University of Southern California is we're able to take those cells and actually send them to the University of Southern California, for which they're able to identify what is it about the interaction between the two that makes them so dangerous. And so we are sending University of Southern California our cells to do that, and with their expertise, Dr. Bohan has done a wonderful job looking at how they're interacting, et cetera. And just to kind of connect the areas of this, the third component of our project is to be able to have our colleagues, Dr. Edward Aguirre at the Florida A&M University, to perform this development of what's called a nanoparticle. And that's kind of a fancy term for looking at how we're putting together these molecules. And within these molecules, we're putting a piece of therapy on there, or chemotherapy, and then we're also putting on another piece that's going to identify it. And I'm going to simplify this, and I'll beat up Dr. Aguirre's work, and he's the expert behind it. But to simplify, what he's doing, he's developing these that are going to be specific to target the cancer. And so Dr. Aguirre is able to take a system where we maintain a viable piece of tumor, and he can figure out how those molecules are interacting with the tumor and how we can eventually kill them. And they're being specifically drawn to this tumor and specifically isolating this tumor and killing it. And so the hope is that, as I mentioned earlier, this chemotherapy, this toxin that we're giving these patients, which are systemic and can hurt all parts of your body, we can limit that, and we can actually use this molecule from the Florida A&M University to be very directed to kill the cancer alone. And while he's doing this with this system that we have, where he has a viable piece of tumor, he's also sending that molecule to University of Southern California, for which Dr. Bohan can look at how that molecule can affect it in her system. And so we have multiple different investigators doing wonderful work and actually complementing each other. And the hope is that the National Institute of Health and the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, have realized that it's this kind of expertise and this kind of cohesiveness that allows us to be successful.
That is absolutely, correct. That is the power of collaboration. I mean, you have all the brains in all that you have within the nation at different institutions working together. And this is true translational research.
Absolutely.
True translational research.
Absolutely.
So I just dropped a word that they may not be. Can you tell us about how your research is translational research?
So there's three components of research that at least that I'll try to simplify. There's a basic component, there's a translational component, and there's a clinical component. The basic component is investigators to some degree like me that sit behind and look at what the cell is doing in a dish and how the cells are interacting with one another and just some very complex things. What's happening within the cell, and again, this is one component of our lab. The clinical component is when people really look at patients and their outcomes based on data, demographics, and to some degree there's a lot of great clinical research being done on therapies, but they're working very closely with patients and patient populations. The translational component is where we start to look at what the key terms are, either bench to bedside or bedside to bench, in which we really start taking the clinical aspects of the disease process and bringing it to the basic components, and we're lying in the middle where we're kind of seesawing things and trying to balance them out. What makes our work translational is the fact that we work with patients. They give us permission to use tissues for a very important work. And just a side note on that, all of our patients who have this horrible disease give us permission. I have never had one patient say no to me. And the reason is because they realize that it's a horrible disease. And I tell them this, that this work, this allowance that you give us, to be able to, this consent that you give us, to be able to use your tissues, might not be able to help you today. But the idea is that we'll be able to help people in the future. But with the clinical component, as I mentioned, when we speak to these patients and they allow us this tissue, that goes clinical to almost the basic realm. And that's where it becomes translational, because we have a really strong aspect of our clinical component with our basic science component, and they're able to somewhat talk and communicate.
Absolutely.
And so the word translate. So we're translating clinical components into a basic component, and then eventually be able to take that basic component and bring it back to the clinics.
Absolutely. And this is one of the things that is so great about the CaRE2 Center, because we believe in having specific science that really makes an impact, especially in the Latino and the Black community. You've mentioned a couple of times your appreciation for patients who allow you or who partner with you to be able to get their samples and tissues, to be able to do science. And you've talked also about the collaboration that you have within scientists. I want you to just take a few minutes and just talk more to us about the importance of partnership with patients and the public in providing biospecimens for research.
Absolutely.
And that is mainly, let's just focus on the Latino and the Black population,
right.
because that's what we are missing right now. And that is one of the reasons we have health disparities. We have cancer disparities, we have health disparities, because we don't have enough samples from the minority population. So
Yeah.
as a clinician, as a scientist, you fully get it. So could
Yeah.
you tell us a little more about that?
Historically, unfortunately, there's been a lot of I don't want to say the word problems, but we've had problems in the past with clinical research in this country. I mean, we can talk about the Tuskegee experiments, which I think left a significant impact on our patient population. We're talking about blacks and Hispanics. There's always been that sense of research as a potential opportunity for gain in areas that weren't going to benefit us or benefit our population. And so that has taken a lot for clinicians and research to try to break that. And to some degree that has allowed an opportunity for me to be able to say, I'm a man of color, right? I'm an immigrant. I came from Mexico many years ago, and our family came here and we did well. We were able to take something that was allowed to us, which is a beautiful opportunity here in this country, and develop where we are. I think that when I speak to my patients of Latino and Black descent or African descent, and I speak with them, they're very open to discussions with me. I can't always say that about a lot of my colleagues because they have difficulty establishing that rapport that is missing. Something that I think that we as a community need to develop and continue. Because I think nowadays the research that we're doing is necessary. We need to be able to attract different ethnic populations as Blacks and Latinos to really help us understand this. And so I implore that the community understands that we're trying to make this big difference. And with the Health Equity Center that we have and the CaRE2, that's one of our goals, is to be able to not only reach the community physicians, but also the community and tell them we need the tissue to be able to really help and bring and give back the kind of the beauty of the translational research that we discuss, to be able to say to a patient, your tissue is important to us. Well, why is it important? Because you're different. Well, what makes me so different is because everybody's different, but you're different because of the fact that we want to know if there are differences within your tumor that we eventually will be able to help you and others in the future. And so it's for me, I've been fairly successful with those conversations, and could they be a part with where I'm from and
who you are.
The ability to interact with me and even to develop this great rapport. But I think there's also a part where we tell them that the research is going to benefit future generations from now, and if not you, one day it'll affect potentially family members of yours or friends of yours that we can help. So as a community, I think we have a lot to work on. As physicians, we have a lot to work on. As even myself, I have a lot to work on. But I think that the importance of the tissue that these patients provide us is just incredibly. It's just you can't put a price on it.
Yeah, absolutely. They are right there, equal partners with us to be able to get the science forward. I still have a few more questions for you. It's not oftentimes that you get a clinician-scientist, so I have a lot of questions. You mentioned right now about your background and how your background has really enabled you to connect with the minority population, because you understand how they feel, not only in caring for them, but also in making them a partner with your research. So can you tell us a little bit more why it then becomes important for you? Because I know you have a lot of underrepresented minorities in your lab working with you, and you're training them. Why is it important for us to focus on training the next generation who really come from minority population?
I think that's critical. I mean, there's no question about it. No matter how we look at it as human beings, we find our connectivity. And sometimes our background does that. As much as this country has been considered a melting pot, we still identify with certain populations. As an immigrant, I believe that I identify with a lot of the immigrant population because I believe that there are a lot of people here to do great things. And had somebody stopped me at the border and not allowed me to pass, I wouldn't be here today, right? So I would be somewhere else. And so I think that there's
let me just pause you. And you wouldn't have saved as many lives as you have saved.
We try. But you know, I think that it's incredibly important to have people who identify. Some of the more prouder moments of mine is when I have that Hispanic or Latino patient in the clinic, and then you see they bring their kids and they're looking at me, like they're looking at me like, wow, you know. And we get a lot of immigrant populations that come and work the fields and do a lot of the migrant workers, and their children will sit there and they will look at me, and that's an incredible moment.
I know.
Because they identify with somebody that you know, I can be there one day, and it becomes a dream for them, and I can almost see that in their eyes, and it's and when I catch that in that, it just stops everything, and it's
very meaningful.
Right, for me, as a physician and as a partner, and the same thing goes with blacks who look at us as a minority population, but they understand. They understand that it's the underrepresented components that will one day continue to build this great country. No matter how you want to look at it, this country will become more diverse as the years go by.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the more diversity we have in the field, the better it's going to be for everybody to be able to promote certain works in certain areas. And it's going to allow for our patient population to trust us more, to be able to work with us more. And just to spin off a little bit on that comment, I think one of the biggest problems we've had as a large academic center like the University of Florida or Florida A&M or even the University of Southern California is our inability to kind of come off of this ivory tower component and walk into the neighbors that are miles from us and say, hey, listen, I'm Jose Trevino. I work at the University of Florida, and I'm here to help you guys. And I've had the privilege of going to functions that you've established,
and
which
you
have
are
been
a wonderful speaker.
Outstanding. And I've gone to churches here in Gainesville, and I've spoken to them, and for them to see that I'm willing to step down and speak to this large black population about the dangers of cancer and pancreatic cancer and the importance of screening and all the things that are important to us, I think are great, and they love it. And it's just like, and a lot of them are like, wow, you know, you took time out of your busy life to come here and speak to us. And I'm like, isn't this what it's about?
Yeah, it is.
It's about us as a community, and we forget that sometimes. And so,
well, you don't, because I've seen you in action in the community. So, and you do such a beautiful job of talking with the community. Now, you know, you within the short time, I think within the short time that you've been at University of Florida, you are one of the, you know, I think one of the best hires that University of Florida had, because I was so glad when you joined University of Florida, and it has been so outstanding what you've been able to do. But one interesting thing that you're doing now that I want you to talk a little more about, you are not satisfied at looking at disparities within the United States. Now, I hear through the grapevine, you're developing another project that is going to help us better understand disparities in the United States by studying population outside the country.
Absolutely.
So could you talk to us a little bit about that?
So some of the research that has been out there and that we're developing and actually starting to establish more and more is that, you know, unfortunately, blacks have a worse outcome with this disease. It strengthens the idea that we should do research in pancreatic cancer health disparities. We want to know the differences between blacks and whites and Latinos. And as I mentioned earlier, this will help us determine what particular therapies will help more in one particular population as opposed to another. And for me, just helping anybody get through this horrible disease and determining therapies is so important.
Absolutely.
But, you know, we have to remember we all came from somewhere. Right? And so the idea that we're developing partnerships with in a transatlantic approach or going across the Atlantic Ocean and I'll be specific, to Africa, to determine what is it about the disease process there that is so different than the disease process home. Now, as I said earlier, a lot of our black population has African descent. And when we really start to dig into what are the possible incidents and the outcomes in Africa, what we started to note is that the cancer itself is developed earlier there, and the outcomes in terms of the clinical outcomes or the death rates are much higher. So we think, in terms of looking at it just initially, that the disease might be worse. The pancreatic cancer disease might be worse in Africa than it is here. Now, why is that important? Because when we start to really delve into the possible changes of the tumor, or the as I said earlier, when we look at the tumor itself and identify the differences, we might be able to say, well, if there's a difference there, that there's a target there, that we might be able to use that for what we're doing here in this country. You know, one of the things that we've been looking at as well from the Latino community, which is part of this healthcare component, or sorry, the CaRE2 center, is that Hispanics actually do better than everybody.
Wow.
Right? And so
Good.
It's great.
Awesome.
And I think that's outstanding because when people say, well, wait, hold on. We thought all minority patients were all the same, right? We're all going to put minorities do worse, whites do better. And I'm like, no. Hispanics actually do better than whites. And so I have young investigators in my lab that are very passionate about this work. And what they've recognized is that when we start breaking down Hispanics into Cubans, Mexicans, Dominicans,
seeing differences
et cetera, right? And we're seeing differences in that Dominicans do the best. And so, you know, this is all just very preliminary work. But I mean, this goes to show that there are differences in the Hispanic population that, again, might be able to allow us. What is it about them?
Yes.
And the therapies we might be able to use in these populations might be able to give us a better kind of foundation to identify differences in other populations. So our initial work right now is to really start looking at what are these horrible components of this tumor that are killing our patients in the African community, or the African American community, or the Black community, and how do we determine that? Let's go to what we would consider the starting point of all of that potentially, and look at the differences in a transatlantic approach.
Very unique, very unique. I mean, this is really exciting. This is what science is about. And I hope not only is this really education for the community, but I do hope that there's some, you know, Latino, Black students out there who are watching Dr. Jose Trevino, who is a clinician-scientist, and they're saying, I want to be like him. Yes, you need to be like him. Okay. So I know that you have another segment of CaRE2 Center to do, so I would allow you to tell us if there's anything more that you would like to share with us before you go to your next segment.
So I'm a very structured individual to some degree. What I'd like to do is begin by saying is that, you know, for our community partners out there, the people out in the community, whether it be primary care physicians, whether it be our patient population, to really become more involved. I mean, the CaRE2 Equity Center that we have allows that, and allows people to come in and speak with us, and speak with you, and speak with other investigators about what they're passionate about and where they feel that our limitations are. So I empower the community to do something more, to come in and speak with us about this. We're always open to it, and I think it's very important for us to continue to do the great work that we're doing. Investigators, students, medical students, undergraduate students, surgical residents, or residents in general of a underrepresented minority to come in and do some work. I think that a lot of what drives me is the fact that I'm an immigrant minority. Right? And so I see that there are a lot of areas of research, and this is what makes my work in health disparities so important.
Absolutely.
Because I take you have to have that passion and that self-interest for it. And so it's very important. I think that if I can get another Latino or a Black to come in and do the work, it would drive them. And currently, as you know, we have a CaRE2 undergraduate student that's doing great work in the lab, and he's a Black and African American, and he's doing a wonderful job. And I think that he's taken this and done a wonderful job since then. And so the hope is that we can continue to build on that. And three, to look at my partners in my academic, at the academic realm, and say, we got to get out there. We got to get out to the community. And so there's so many people knocking on our doors and to some degree not able to get through. Maybe we should turn this around a little bit. Maybe we should reach out to them and say, how is it that we can help you get to us to be able to be allowed the care that we can provide you? We're fairly subspecialized, which means that we're very expert in what we do. And I think that it's important that the community recognize that, and that there's not always this idea that, oh my God, you have a horrible disease, go home and and die. And idea of hope is within us to give to them. And I think sometimes we lack on that. So those would be the three kind of key areas that I would send back out to the people in our community and in our centers to really start working together toward this horrible disease, against this horrible disease.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Jose Trevino. I've known you for years, and we've become friends, and it really is, I'm in awe of your passion and your commitment and the exciting projects that you're doing. I guess the sky is the limit. So,
Absolutely.
and thank you so much for all what you do for underrepresented minorities also. I know you do a lot of mentoring and you do a lot of research training of minority students. So, here we are concluding another segment of the CaRE2 Health Equity Center, our cancer research link. You can see we have outstanding clinician-scientists that really open up their labs and open up their doors for people to come and get trained. And this is really, truly, I'm in awe of what you're all doing in the lab. Thank you for joining us. Until next time. Bye.